Hey everybody, once again, this is my second episode of the chronological gaming units here. I went through the 8-bit Nintendo, the 2600, and the 7800, the things I had here. That was my first generation here. Okay, 2005, 1995 came in here. The PlayStation came out. But actually, the PlayStation came out in 1995, and the Nintendo 64 came out in 1996. And this is where the modern classic here, the second modern classic here, on the Sony Playstation, is a major shift, reshaping here. The Sony Playstation and the Nintendo 64 were the next systems I purchased after the Super Nintendo. That was late 1996, and I basically purchased the Sony Playstation September of 1996 here, and I got Nintendo 64 for Christmas in 1996. Nintendo 64s were actually hard to find at that time. I was hunting for the system, and it was a really hot thing about this. And saying, hey, people were thrilled about the Nintendo 64 just as they were thrilled about the Wii. It says, I was hunting around like this. I said, do you have a Nintendo 64? It says, sorry, we're sold out. That was the first thing of the Nintendo 64. I mean, it was a really hot commodity because Super Mario 64, I mean, Mario in 3D. Well, not exactly 3D as we feel today because of the 3Ds. We have the glasses, the 3D glasses. PlayStation 3 is coming out in 3D glasses. There is a firm where they're now setting their PS3s up to play 3D games today. But 3D back in was about polygons, and that's Sony. We were shifting the way because we're going through these 2D side-scrolling games. We used to deal with it here towards 3D polygons, and Super Mario 64 was the primary reason why we purchased a Nintendo 64 in the first place. I mean, we actually have the first two games out there: Super Mario 64 and Killer Instinct Gold. Were the first two games I purchased here. And the games were actually pretty they're pretty expensive. And as you can see, games today cost $59.99, and of course we're used to that game. But you know how much Nintendo 64 games? This was in 1996. $69.99 to $79.89.99. I've seen games on the Nintendo 64 that was over $100. I mean, goodness sakes. I mean, Nintendo was pretty hot because the 8-bit NES and Super NES were both successful systems. That doesn't mean that the Genesis was a bad system. Certainly, it was also a successful system. The Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were downright fierce. But then, that isn't until Sega screwed up with the 32X. You have to do all these attachments. And the Sega 32X, if you look at it, says, oh, you just pop it in on the Sega Genesis. No, you have to hook up a lot of cables and stuff to hook up the 32X. And I didn't own the Genesis in the first place, but certainly I'm probably not going to buy the 32X for now because of the Genesis here. I might buy the Master System first, and then the 32X here. But going back to the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, the Sony PlayStation I finally got into because it also had good games for the system. And sure, it had some rocky start here, but Tekken and Resident Evil were the first two games I bought for the system. Of course, remember Resident Evil? It was the survival horror classic game that people know about. Resident Evil from Capcom. My high school James Work got in his Sony PlayStation to play Resident Evil. and we had a lot of fun time in our spare time. And sure enough, our grades are suffered a lot here, and video games are in the back of my head. Good, that's a good point. That's Sony Playstation. Wonderful software. We've got Final Fantasy games, including 7, 8, and 9. Dragon Warrior games. Late in the game, anyway. And all these, well, movie-based titles and the stuff like that. I bought more PlayStation games than, well, same amount of PlayStation games and Nintendo 64 games, but Nintendo had pretty good quality games. I had Blast, of course, Body Harvest, Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie. Nintendo had some very good software first time. And Nintendo and Sony were both pretty good systems, but it has such bad points that are all spread around this, saying that the PlayStation, Nintendo 64 are good here. They also had a Sega Saturn. I don't think it was a bad system. It probably, well, it was a pretty short-lived system that lasted for a few years and it died off, and the PlayStation lived on. I'm not going to talk about the Saturn. I never owned the Saturn. I might try buying the Saturn one day here at Game Underground one day. Anyway, but I just give that a try one day. Basically, what I liked about the Nintendo 64 is it had kick-ass games. Yes, I talked about Super Mario 64. I remember Turok Dinosaur Hunter, awesome game. Then it was basically Super Mario 64 came in, and all these companies came in, and of course there were rip-offs, and of course good games comes with rip-offs, and rip-off games, cash-ins, and like this, and that's what basically the game is. Other games were Excite Bike 64, Mario Kart 64, awesome game. Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. I like Ocarina of Time the better because you don't have, in Majora's Mask, what I hate about the game is having to reset the game all the time. And that's basically Nintendo 64 and Sony Playstation. Good games for it. Now we're going to go over the bad points of the PlayStation. As you can see, the first PlayStation I owned actually slowly broke down because, have you heard, I still remember having to turn my PlayStation stopped reading discs, it crashed, and the games ran choppy and slow, and the movies, and it got worse and worse and worse. And then when I turned the PlayStation upside down, it was actually a temporary fix of the problem. A few weeks later, my PlayStation started not playing well again, and that's when I had to throw away the PlayStation and buy a new one. And because I think it was probably after a year when my PlayStation first died. The thing about it is this, is that Nintendo learned from the 8-bit Nintendo's mistakes when you couldn't read the cartridge anymore because the 72-bit connector ran out. And they made a better connector on the Super Nintendo, and the Nintendo 64 never broke. I actually played my Nintendo 64 to death and never had any problems with it. I had to clean up the cartridge a couple of times, but well, that's over here. But the Nintendo 64, never not any problems with it. My games still work perfectly, and I actually still have many of my original games I purchased when I was coming out on the Nintendo 64. Most games I have in my collection are games I first purchased back then, and that's the Nintendo 64. The PlayStation, I've been through two PS1s, two PlayStation 1s, and yes, of course, the first PlayStation. I've never owned the PS1 Slim. They just called the PSONE when they first released the Slimline PlayStation and PlayStation 1 back at the time. But I played, but yeah, that's okay. I mean, two systems, I find it acceptable Because, oh yeah, systems, okay, crash here. And, that's basically my Nintendo 64, Sony Playstation. Stay tuned. I'm going to go through the 6th generation consoles I've been through.